Hello and welcome back to Lorcana Villain. My name is Baker and today we're going to be taking a look at a document released by Ravensburg with all the information that we've been waiting for to do with organised official play. There's lots of information here to do with being a tournament organiser and a judge and lots of different things, but I'm only going to be focusing on the stuff based on relevant to being a player. Now, I haven't played real tournaments for card games in a long time, but from the age of like 13 to 18, 19, I played Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitively and very seriously, like travelling to a different part of the country pretty much every weekend, going to tournaments and really taking it seriously. So even though it's been a while, I have a lot of experience with what it's like at an actual tournament, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that are getting into their first trading card game and they're interested to go to official play, and you know, it might be a whole new thing for them. So definitely a video worth watching, or at the very least this document will be linked below for you to go and take a look through yourself, but just to give us an idea of some of the rules. But I'm also going to talk about a few thoughts that I have on it based off my experience in competitive play. I've also been to a few Pokemon tournaments IRL in the last few years, but not full time. But there is one thing that I was really hoping to see on this list, which isn't here, and I foresee it being quite a big potential problem with competitive play. We'll get to that at the end. We're going to go through things in the order that they are actually listed here. And the first thing to bring up is to do with being a spectator. So it says here, spectators are expected to allow Disney Lorcana tournaments to proceed unaffected by their observation. Any person physically present at a Disney Lorcana event that is not otherwise designated a tournament role is considered a spectator. So you are allowed to go to tournaments just for the sake of watching. Spectators are expected to remain silent and unobtrusive while matches proceed, with one exception. If a spectator observes a rule violation, they should ask the players to pause their game while the spectator notifies a judge. The spectator should not reveal any details of the violation to the players, but should instead relay this information to the judge so that the situation can be addressed correctly. So, in my experience, I don't know if it's changed, but a long time ago when I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, this specific rule of if you see a rule violation, you're not allowed to say what it is. This is saying if you see something go wrong, you just have to go, could you please both pause? I've seen a violation. And that's all you're really allowed to say, and then you have to call for a judge. Whereas in my old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Days, it wasn't uncommon for someone watching to just go, oh no, you can't do that, you've done that, and then the players go, yep, you're right, and as long as the game state hasn't changed to an unsolvable position, then that was normally okay. But maybe that's changed even for Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon, but this for me is new, seeing that it is specifically said you cannot reveal any of the information about what you see as being the problem. So I don't hate it. I think that's a good way of. I think that's a better way of doing it. You know, don't allow, you know, for that potential conflict between people, especially if we want to minimize conflict. We want this to be a happy game. We want this to be, you know, good vibes, all that jazz. So yeah, I like this being specifically said. And it does mention players must always request that a spectator not observe their match. This request should involve a judge. Tournament officials may always restrict the ability of spectators to observe matches. So yeah, if you are not comfortable with someone watching your match, I think 9 times out of 10 you are allowed to just say, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with that, and you will be back. Obviously it says here that it's a request and it has to involve a judge, so a judge can technically say, no, that's fine, they're allowed to watch. But I imagine for at least Swiss rounds, they would always honour you. You know, maybe if you're in the final and you're saying, I don't want anyone watching, maybe the judge probably says, well, that's kind of a whole thing, we all want to see this. But, you know, still worth mentioning that, you know, you are allowed to request someone. And again, I understand, like, some people get put off by someone being like right there watching. It's different if Lorcana gets to the stage that we're all hoping it gets to, where there's a big stage for feature matches and it gets streamed and all that. Then obviously there's the pressure of knowing that there's a camera on you and loads of people are watching, but at least you've not got they tend to be far away other than the table judge, and I'm afraid if you can't get used to a table judge, then this might not be the game for you. Apologies if that sounds harsh to say, but if you're going to play this game competitively, if you plan on getting to top 8s and stuff, there will be a table judge there. So, and that's always a good thing. So yeah, definitely worth mentioning to do with spectators. It officially says that we must do a dice roll or a coin flip I prefer dice rolls. This is up to, people may disagree. I've seen way too many dodgy coin flips that it just leaves open to interpretation of, like, are you trying to manipulate the way this flips? Even if it's called in the air, just eliminate the possibility altogether. I think a dice roll, either odds and evens or high roll, is just a much better way of doing it. But obviously, make sure you're doing don't give any opponent a reason to believe that you are trying to manipulate your dice or your dice roll or your coin flip. Disney Lorcana is played in best of 3 format. In practice, this means that the players will play games until one player has won 2 games. Drawn games do not count as wins. If the match is concluded before one player has won 2 games, then the player that has won the most games is the winner of the match. If both players have the same number of wins at this point, the match is a draw. So if you're in Swiss, you can just draw. It does go on to say, though, that if you are in single elimination, so top 8, or if it's a tournament that's just doing single elimination, then this changes slightly, and if you're currently 0-0 or 1-1, then whoever's ahead on lore by the end of the 5 turns will be the winner. Although we haven't discussed the 5 turns, let's do that now. So back in my day of Yu-Gi-Oh, and I think with Pokemon as well, it's either a 3 or a 4 turn rule, or I think it's when time's called, you get the player's turn, and then it's like 1, 2, 3. This specifically says that when time is called, whichever player's turn it is, they finish that turn, and then you get 5 whole turns, which I think is much cleaner, and I think it allows more time to see where the game would have naturally gone. And again, if you're in a Swiss game, after those 5 turns, if it's still if there's not a decisive winner and it's not knockout at this point, single elimination, then it just goes down to who's got the most games, and if it's a draw on that, then it's a draw overall. So good to know, and I really like the 5 turn rule. Loser chooses who goes first. Obviously it's best of 3, so if you lose the first game, then you get to choose if you go first or second. That's pretty standard in my experience, but there you go, cut and dry. Shuffle and cut. You must, anytime that you randomize your deck, which at the moment there's not many opportunities to do so. Obviously there's when you're shuffling up at the beginning of the game and after your mulligan, but other than that, I think it's only Broom, which allows you to put a card back into the deck and shuffle up. There probably is something else, which will probably come to me in editing, but there's not many cards that allow for a lot of shuffling to be going on mid-game. But this does state quite decisively that you are allowed to shuffle and cut, and this may sound really specific, but I have experience, again, from my Yu-Gi-Oh days of seeing people go, oh no, you shuffled so you can't cut. Like, no, it's a cut or a shuffle. You do one or the other. You can't shuffle and then... Like, I've seen people, like, say, okay, shuffle my deck because I had to search for a card. Okay, they shuffled, put it on the table, they cut it. Judge! They shuffled, then cut. I don't know if that's still a thing, but in the past, I know it was a bit of a drama. So it's nice to see it stated really clearly here that you can shuffle and or cut the deck. So that's good to see. It also gives us a bit more specifics about the mulligan. So obviously in casual play, this probably isn't going to be as big of a deal, but it does specifically say that whichever player is going first, both players draw 7, and then whichever player is going first, they put down their mulligan cards and they state how many they are doing. They put them to the bottom and they draw to 7. Sorry, editing correction. You don't draw to 7 until the other player has also chosen which cards they're putting at the bottom of the deck, and then you both draw to 7 together. Then the other player does their mulligan. Now, again, in casual play, this won't always happen if you're just playing with your friend, or I went to a league last week where we weren't doing this. We were just, drawing our cards. Yeah, I'm mulligan 3, 4. Yep, cool, shuffle, let's go. But this states that you must do it by the correct procedure, and I recommend you just getting used to doing it this way, because unfortunately, as much as we want to keep this positive and, there will be some toxicity around, unfortunately. And you will get a player who will try to shark you because you didn't go by the official mulligan rules. So if your opponent is meant to be going first because you got one game won, if you just absentmindedly draw and do your mulligan, they technically already have a cause to shark you. We'd like to think that people wouldn't, or would give the benefit of the doubt, especially to newer players, but I compel you I compel you, just get used to doing it the way it's officially stated it needs to be done. Don't give anyone the opportunity to call a judge on you and try and get you. We don't know what the penalty would be for something like that. Maybe it's as bad as a game loss. Maybe it's probably as simple as a warning the first time you do it. We don't know. Like, we don't know if we're going to get to a point. Like in Pokemon, there's prize penalties. So are we going to start getting lore penalties? Like, are we going to see for certain violations where it's not bad enough to be a game loss, but they're just going to go, okay, so you're going to lose a certain amount of lore, or if you haven't got any lore, your opponent's going to gain a certain amount of lore. We don't know. It doesn't say anything about this, about like specifics to do with penalization, but I'm sure as time goes on, we will learn. It also says you can concede for any reason, but you are not allowed to offer your opponent an incentive to concede, nor are you allowed to accept. You're not allowed to be bribed as well. So yeah, just like if you're going to concede for any reason, make sure it's not because your opponent has said you want to split the prizes, or they're trying to peer pressure you or emotionally manipulate you or anything. Just don't do it. Again, if you're playing a friend and you're planning on dropping, make sure there's no strings attached. Just, yep, I concede. You are allowed to just concede for any reason. Deck lists. If you're experienced in TCG, you'll be very accustomed to deck lists. For a limited tournament, players will fill out a deck list as part of a deck construction. These deck lists will be provided to a tournament official by the end of deck construction. Players may request to see their deck list between matches. These requests will be granted whenever feasible. Deck lists are considered the ultimate arbiter of which cards the player intended to play. Players must take care to use complete card names, since many characters' cards have similar names. And there's a section here on deck checks. Judges at competitive tournaments will perform deck checks as much as is feasible. Decks should be checked after shuffling has completed, but before opening hands are drawn. Deck checks are intended to verify that players are playing the correct deck as registered on their deck list. So yeah, you will have to get used to writing out a deck list. I remember in the past with Yu-Gi-Oh! It had to be handwritten. It doesn't say anything about handwritten here. It just says that it needs to be provided on a sheet of paper. So I'm hoping that you will be allowed to type up and print out your deck list and hand it in that way. Obviously, if it's like a sealed tournament, you'll have to, because you don't know what you're going to be playing, you'll have to write it out there and then. But yeah, it looks like we will be allowed to type up deck lists and then hand them in. But yeah, make sure you're using full card names. And again, like it says here, deck lists are considered the ultimate arbiter of which cards the player intended to play. So if you decide to make a last minute deck change, might be completely legitimate, and you just forgot to make that change on your list, and then you get deck checked round 1 to 10, whatever, then regardless of how true it might be, you saying, oh no, I've been playing that since the beginning, that's all what I always intended to play, that's just a mistake on my deck list, they are still going to end up saying, well, the deck list is what we need to go by. So even if they don't punish you for it with a game loss or a lore loss or something, they will expect you to make your deck match what is already on the list. So please be prepared for that. Don't think that, say, like if you get deck checked and there's a mistake, don't think that saying, oh no, I've been playing that since the beginning. Doesn't matter. You must, they will go by your deck list. That needs to be what you match up. So one to watch out for. Section here on written notes, which is one of the most interesting parts of this entire document. Players are encouraged to keep written track of lore totals, but no other written notes are permitted. Referring to outside notes during a match is considered outside assistance. Players may not take notes during drafting. So I was convinced that I didn't expect this, because I was fully prepared to go into official play with my notebook and making sure I'm writing down what I'm inking and what my opponent's inking, because you do forget. Not allowed. You are allowed, and not just allowed, it's insisted that you keep lore via pen and paper, because you're not allowed to use the official app. It says you're allowed to use the official app for casual play, but for tournament play, you are not allowed to use it. You're not even allowed to have an electronic device like in hand's reach while you're playing an official game. So you must use notes, pen and paper, but you are not allowed to take any notes other than tracking lore. So yeah, really interesting, and it is going to add a higher, I don't know if you want to call it a skill tier. The fact that one player that might be able to just remember better than the other what they've inked and what the opposing players inked. I've made this call before that if you're not allowed to make notes, it just increases the skill level, because you've also got to be very good at remembering stuff. But the argument given back to me was, well, why is remembering every detail considered a skill. And I don't know where I stand on that. Let me know what you think. But nonetheless, you're not allowed to take notes. We've got some in-game information here as well. During games, players are expected to communicate openly with their opponents. When adding a card to their inkwell through the normal once-per-turn action, the player adding the card must ensure that their opponent has full knowledge of which card is being added, including announcing the name of the card. The opponent must be allowed to verify that the card has the inkable flourish. So this is something that I already ran into a little bit of a problem with my first league that I went to the other week. It wasn't a huge problem. It was only casual play, and like it wasn't a big deal. But I was playing a couple of people who were inking very, like, they were going there. They were like literally just barely flashing it, putting it on the table, just saying like one word in the card name, which again, sometimes there are cards with it's the same character, but it's a different version of that character. And again, I let it go because most of the time I was able to just about make out what it was. But if it was an official tournament, I would have probably been a bit more, could you please be a bit clearer in what you're inking? Like when I'm inking, I'm literally going Ankle Rapunzel, make it like watching their eyes, see that they've seen it, and then it goes down. So yeah, make sure that you're being really clear about this. The current status of any card in play, exerted already, damage marked, whether the card's ink is dry, etc., must be completely and correctly communicated by that card's controller whenever requested by a player. So you shouldn't even need to be requested. It shouldn't need to be requested. You should just be doing this anyway. And it will happen occasionally where it will just be you'll forget, you'll sing Friends on the Other Side with Maleficent, and you won't exert straight away, and you'll draw 2, and then suddenly you're looking at your cards, and suddenly maybe we've forgotten that Maleficent should be exerted, and like, can I challenge? Can I quest? Just try and be real. Like, mistakes will happen, and I will make mistakes, but let's do our best to make sure that we are making sure the board is accurately depicted to the game state as we go. Just makes it easier for you, for your opponent, and just keeps everybody happy. When a player has multiple simultaneous actions to resolve, that player must announce the order of resolution before beginning to resolve the first one. This is really interesting. Was not expecting this. I'm not mad about it. We talked in one of my previous videos about the interaction between the 3-cost Dr. Facilier in Amethist and Friends on the Other Side. The 3-cost Facilier states whenever a song is played, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck. I think you change the order, or you put one at the top, you can manipulate the top 2 cards of your deck. And there was some conversation about if you play Friends on the Other Side, what goes first? Do you draw first and then manipulate, or do you manipulate and then draw? And I thought the initial ruling that we got given was that you would draw your cards first and then Facilier would resolve. This is saying we get to choose, so that's great. I don't know I'm not sure of any other specific interactions that we currently have available from our card pool that's going to be effective towards, probably, but just that one example that I've given, that's really good to know that you are literally just allowed to say, right, I've got Facilier on the field, 3 cost, I play Friends on the Other Side, I'm going to resolve Facilier first, and then I'm going to resolve Friends on the Other Side. Cool, manipulate the deck, draw 2. So yeah, really good to know. Exerted cards should rotate 90 degrees clockwise to indicate their status. Ready cards should be upright, stuff we know by now if we've been playing the game. A player may choose to exert their cards in the counterclockwise direction if they choose, but they should be consistent with all of their cards. Yeah, please at least be consistent with, like, don't be putting some clockwise and some counterclockwise. Lore gains must always be announced and must include the new lore value for that player after the lore increase. This ensures that both players fully understand the current lore score and that any discrepancies can be found and remedied as soon as possible. So this is more important, I think, than you may think as well. Because, again, and I'm thinking, some people may think I'm thinking from a really skeptic point of view and, like, saying things are like, oh, God, that's not going to happen. I think you're being a bit dramatic. From what I've seen, I don't think I am being dramatic. So I see here, because this is in black and white in the rules, a problem I foresee is you're going to gain lore, and if you don't say, yeah, so you quest, and you go, you're meant to go to 1 lore. I write it down. If I don't say it out loud, I am now at 1 lore. I feel there is room here for later in the game your opponent to say, well, you didn't declare it, so I haven't got it written down. So now when a judge comes over, it's just 2 contrasting points of view. Say it out loud. like, I know a lot of TCG people don't really like talking to people. They just want to play the game and keep communication to the bare minimum, and that's absolutely fine. I totally get it. But you need to be saying this out loud. You can't just be going, Quest Maleficent, write down, finish. You must say it and confer that they too have not only heard you, but done it as well. Like, I really recommend, even if you quest and you go, I go to 2, if you don't see them immediately write something down, do not continue. Do not continue playing the game. I know that sometimes that might be hard because you might be like, you might have a 4-turn combo and you're going, right, I'm going to do this. I quest, I go to 11, I do this. Slow down, watch them, make them do it, and don't do it like, right, you're questing 3 times and going up 3. Okay, cool, let's just go from 3 to 6. Do it one at a time. And the reason I say this is, again, Yu-Gi-Oh days. I remember one of my first national champion, it wasn't even my game, it was a friend of mine, but basically with Yu-Gi-Oh, if you're not experienced, you both start at 8,000 life points and it's first to 0 loses. And generally speaking, it's not uncommon to go, okay, I have 2 monsters, one with 1,800 attack and one with 1,200 attack, and I'm going to attack your life points directly so you lose 3,000. So I'm just going to go from 8,000 down to 5,000. Which was quite common, but I have seen it in official play, the circumstance I was just talking about, where my friend was doing that and taking things off in chunks, and the opposite player was taking things off a bit at a time. And at a point in the game, there came a discrepancy of what the life points should be, but because one player had been much more detailed in removing life points than the other, they went with what he had as the life points. So take from this, slow down. If you are gaining lore, first of all, write it down one at a time. If you're questing for 3 with 3 1-pip characters, don't just go, right, I go from 3 lore to 6 or 0 to 3, whatever. I go to 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and make them write it all down properly. Again, if this is casual play or like your friends, maybe you probably don't need to worry about this, but if this is top level play, and especially if it's against opponents you don't know, do all these things. Just do it politely. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm going to quest Maleficent to 1, and they don't do it because they think you're going to quest for something else. Sorry, could you just mark that off on your sheet for me? There's nothing wrong with that at all. Highly recommend that people stay on top of that. Players are expected to maintain a clear game state whenever possible. This includes pointing out mandatory effects whenever they occur, even if they are from the opponent's card. For purposes of this rule, a mandatory effect is one that does not include the word may in its text. Failing to remind a player of a may effect is not against the rules, but players are encouraged to remind their opponents of these effects in order to foster the most positive play experience for all involved. So yeah, it goes without saying, for the sake of sportsmanship and just again keeping a positive atmosphere, you should help your opponent, like, you should point out these things. Like, it could be that they go, no, I'm not going to trigger that, and they've got their reason for it, and then you go, okay, cool. But you should do these things. But it does say here it is not against the rules to not remind them of a may. And the reason for that more than anything is because you can't prove it, because the player can just as easily go, oh, I forgot as well. But nonetheless, at top level play, I'm not going to put it past people to not point out that you could have done a thing. But if it had to go off, if it wasn't compulsory and the game state is now altered because of it, then it will come to a point where a judge is going to look at it and is going to make a decision, and it could be that you both are penalised for it, even if it's your opponent that played a card and didn't take an action, a mandatory effect. If it was mandatory and you didn't remind them, there's every chance that you get punished for it as well. So just help, just be positive and good sportsmanship and all that jazz. Inkwell. Players are required to keep their Inkwell cards distinct and separate from any other face-down cards that may be on the table. If there is ever any confusion about which cards are in a player's Inkwell, the player should call a judge immediately so the error can be remedied. So the main thing that comes to mind on this is, I can say from previous experience and from playing Lorcana League the other week, it's not uncommon to want to put your hand on the table, especially if it's your opponent's turn and they're taking some time. If you're going to do this, you cannot put it just right in front of you, because that's where your Inkwell's going to be, and you need to have your Inkwell laid out nicely. Like, I saw someone in League that was just piling them and using a dice just to represent how many there are, which is tidier. I don't think you're allowed to do that in official play from what this is saying. So yeah, I'd recommend not putting your hand on the table. I know, like, I do it a lot myself, and there will be times where you have to. If you want to look through the opponent's discard pile, or your own, unless you're an octopus, you kind of have to. But just make sure that you are putting it very clearly on a part of the table that's separate to all your other face down cards. So there's no discrepancy from you or your opponent of what that is exactly. So keep your hand distinct from anything else. Additionally, all readied cards in a player's inkwell must be oriented in the same direction as each other. The same must also be true for exerted cards in that player's inkwell. So again, keep your board tidy. It also says that there is no max deck size still, which a lot of people were expecting that we were going to get a max deck size because of the legendary Yu-Gi-Oh event, but it does specifically say that you must be able to shuffle in a timely manner without assistance. So when inevitably the first person does the Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm going to bring a deck that's this big, you are just going to be told by a judge before you even play, you are not going to be able to sufficiently randomize that deck in a timely manner on your own, and that will be their reason for not allowing you to play the deck. Like, you can sit there and say, oh, but there's no limit to how many cards I'm allowed. Yes, but you cannot sufficiently randomize that in a timely manner. And you go, yeah, I can. No, you can't. If it's that big, to get a sufficient randomization, that's going to take too long. So if you want to do it once for a laugh, by all means, but be prepared to be told that you're not allowed to play. It is 50 minutes per round for Lorcana, but it does also state that if you're in a single elimination, then there should be no time limit. But if there has to be one because of venue restrictions or whatever, then it should be at least 50 minutes. So yeah, I think 50 minutes is, I mean, it's pretty much standard. And again, it's going to come down to what decks you're playing. Ruby Amethyst, you might not even get a game finished. But any other decks, you should be able to get 2 to 3 games going. And it does state that if a full round finishes before the 50 minutes is up and all the games are finished, then the judge is allowed to start the next round sooner than they had intended. But it does specifically say that they're not allowed to give tardiness punishments. So basically, if you finish your game and you were like, okay, next round doesn't go up for another 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to go get something to eat, I'm going to go get some fresh air, whatever it is. If you then are slightly late to the beginning of the next round because it started early, they're not allowed to punish you for that. They're only allowed to punish you if you are late for what the original round start time would have been. So that's also good to know. That's pretty much everything. Again, there's information here to do with the different types of tournaments, like draft and sealed, and information to do with judges and tournament organisers. But that's pretty much everything concerning official play. Here's my problem that I foresee coming up. And again, I don't want to be too skeptic. Obviously, we want to believe the positivity of everyone and that it's all going to be happy and we're all going to get on like a house on fire. But unfortunately, that's not always going to be the case. And if you've been playing the game, then you know already how much the mulligan matters. But how much the mulligan would matter more if you already knew what colours your opponent was playing. It matters very much. If I know what colours they're playing, then that is going to influence what I decide to mulligan in my opening hand. And unfortunately, we are going to come into situations, intentionally and not, where players are going to know what the other at least what the other person's colours are before going in. And it might not be true both sides. Now, this could be for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the worst is that you go with a couple of friends and it's round 2, and then you go up to the board and you look at the pairings, and you're up against Daniel. And your mate Craig goes, I faced Daniel in the previous round. He's playing red-purple. Cheers, mate. That's already such a big advantage going in. There's also it being completely innocent. Again, we talked about you are allowed to spectate. There is the caveat of you are allowed to request that people don't spectate, but the judge can say, no, they're allowed to spectate, that's fine. So there is just the matter of maybe you're the last game of the round to finish and there's a few people watching, even if it's at a distance. So they now know what you're both playing. And if whoever comes up against you, they know what you're playing. I think this fosters a really bad energy. I don't think it's fair. I really wanted to see in this list that you must reveal your colours to the opponent before you start. And I don't think you should have to prove it, But if the game starts and you're not playing what you said, then that could be penalised by a judge. Just because I want everybody to be on the same footing, because again, it really does matter if you know your opponent's colours and they don't know yours. The mulligan really can put you at a strong advantage over them, and whether it's intentionally because you know someone told you what they were playing, or you just saw, or even quite as simple like when I sat down for my league last week. I sat down first, and it was completely innocent. I have 110% belief that this person was not trying to just get some early information. They were just having a conversation with me and trying to be friendly. I was like, so what colours did you go for? And I told them straight away. But immediately in my head I was like, if this was a tournament, I would say, well, you'll find out in a minute. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be some that say I'm probably being a bit of too much of a skeptic here. But I just think it's going to create horrible situations, and especially when we get into the situations where you know that they know what you're playing because you know, like you've seen that they're with a friend that you played last round, or you recognise them from a crowd that were watching your game, or maybe just before the tournament started, some people were playing practice games and people were wandering around and looking, and suddenly you're playing someone. Oh, I watched you. I saw you sit down earlier playing some casual. You're playing lemon and lime. You are, and then you sit down and you're like, yo, you know what I'm playing. What are you playing then? Let's keep it even. And they can just go, no, I'm not telling you. I think this is going to create really bad situations. I really want to see it put into an official rule that you must reveal your colours. Do you agree with me? Do you think I am completely off the mark? I'll hear all about it in the comments below. But thank you for watching. It's nice to finally get this information. And yeah, I'm very excited to finally get into some official play. If you're brand new to the channel, please hit the like button, subscribe for deck profiles and all that jazz. Everything Lorcana. And we'll see you soon.